Hello, and thanks for taking the time to listen to Reimagining Cyber. New episodes of the podcast drop every Wednesday. So to make sure you never miss a show, do hit the follow or subscribe button wherever you listen. You can also find us on the @Reimagining Cyber YouTube channel. Hello, my name is Rob Aragao, and welcome to Reimagining Cyber. In today's episode, I'm joined by Morgan Adamski, Cyber, Data, and Tech Risk Deputy Leader at PwC US, to talk about one of the biggest security challenges on the horizon, quantum computing. PwC's recently released their 2026 Global Digital Trust Insights Report, part of which highlighted the growing gap between the pace of quantum innovation and organizations' readiness. So much to sink our teeth into. Morgan, thanks for joining me on the show. Great to have you on. Before we dig into the quantum topic, can you take a few minutes to provide a top-level overview of the report?
Yeah, so Global Trust Insight Report surveys about 4,000 different types of cyber executives across 72 countries. And one of the most interesting things is that you see this really intense conversation happening right now about understanding cyber risk when you have a volatile geopolitical environment. So people are tying their investments. Hey, I need to invest more in cyber and resilience because right now I'm not entirely sure how that's going to impact my business as a whole with everything that's going on in the world. And that's kind of understandable, right? Understanding all the events that have happened over the last year, whether it be conflict in the Middle East, or particularly out in Eurasia, or what's happening when you talk about specifically Chinese intrusions into US critical infrastructure. There's just a lot of different conversations and people trying to understand, okay, from a cyber dependency perspective, from a technology dependency perspective, if something was to disrupt or impact my operations, what's the overall risk from a business that I need to think about? And how do I need to invest in specific things to ensure that I have redundancy set up so that it doesn't have a massive impact on what I'm doing day to day? The second thing I think that really came out of that survey that I found interesting was this discussion on investing in proactive cybersecurity measures versus reactive cybersecurity measures. Now, I think it's important to kind of break that down. When you think about reactionary cybersecurity measures, think of that as like passive defense. That's you just having like firewalls, cybersecurity detection, intrusion technology set in place, like the basic things that we think about as cybersecurity professionals you should have to ensure you're kind of check all those boxes, right? You're going to be able to see something that's happening. You're protecting potentially against an adversary moving laterally within your networks. But then there's this discussion about proactive cybersecurity measures, which is essentially how are you going out and looking at your network and saying, let me find the things that are wrong. Let me do red teaming. Let me do vulnerability scanning. Let me think about things like setting up decoys and honeypots to ensure that the adversary is potentially not getting into my networks before they should. Not a lot of investment in that area. And I think that area is really fascinating right now because quite honestly, when you have a national level discussion happening about potentially more offensive cyber operations by the US government, you got to think about what's coming at you. And so I think people have to think about defense in a number of different ways.
Yeah, I think, the way I look at it is, and it's been like this for me for a while, is like the proactive side versus the reactive side, as you were talking about. The reactive side is like just the basic blocking and tackling, building your foundation, good hygiene, like this needs to be in place, period. The proactive side, as you're calling out, much more of the strategic thinking. What is it we're missing? What are we not thinking about right now that may be gaps within our current controls, our capabilities? And by the way, like what's coming next that we have to really start giving some thought to? Because as we all know, right, the bad guys are 2 steps, if not more, ahead of us always. So as you were calling that out, it gets into the topic of obviously quantum computing, which people have been giving some serious thought to, especially as of late, which is great. And that's the strategic kind of aspect of an example that we can talk about in today's conversation. So help for the audience understand, what's real about quantum as it relates to threats and timing at this point in time as we're going into 2026.
Yeah. And let's, to your point, right? It's really hard sometimes to think about quantum, especially as a cybersecurity professional. Like, I'm just trying to do the basics. I'm trying to think about 2-factor authentication, having MFA in place. So when people want to talk about quantum, some people are like, whoa, that's way out in the future. It's nothing that I have to worry about. So let's break it down a little bit and talk about threats to cryptography and what quantum means and what it means to like a general person, right? So obviously, when you talk about encrypted communications, it's about being able to send a secure message, secure information from one individual to the next without it being intercepted or decrypted or anything along those lines. And so There's different types of cryptography, right? There's asymmetric cryptography, which basically means that both communicants have a secret key that they both share, that they both know. And that's really a simple concept to understand, but it's really hard to execute. Because if you think about having secure communications, you and I do it every single day. We go into banking. We want to be able to send our secure banking information. We want to be able to send our secure personal information. And so we have asymmetric cryptography, which essentially uses public key infrastructure, or PKI, where we're able to send secure communications to another recipient where it's essentially encrypted one way, but it can be decrypted carefully the other way. And we're able to do that across multiple different types of applications. A lot easier to execute from a dispersed perspective, a little bit harder to break down, but cryptography is essentially all really smart, secret math, large math that essentially be able to encrypt this communications. When you talk about quantum computers, these are computers that can do large computations that would be able to break down and figure out that math, essentially allowing them to decrypt the information. Now, in quantum computers exist today, which people kind of don't necessarily understand, but they do not have the power or the ability at this point in time to do the large math problems that would allow them to break that public key infrastructure, that PKI type of algorithms that we talk about. Shor's algorithms, there's a lot of different discussion around that. We don't have to get into it. But when you talk about a quantum computer coming online large enough and has the ability to break that type of encryption, that is where people really talk about having quantum resistant cryptography, so that when you really want to send that secure information, that stuff that you want to protect, whether it be a company's trade secrets, their intellectual property, or sensitive data and information that they care about, that's when you really have to think about quantum in a way that's like, okay, in the future, and the timeline is really negotiable, by the way. Everyone has different ideas of when that timeline is going to be, when that computer is going to be available, but it is coming. That's when people have to really think about, okay, how am I thinking about quantum? Where am I using algorithms, or I have specific quantum devices? I have to do asset discovery, a little bit of inventory, to be able to know, how do I upgrade those algorithms so they are quantum resistant against a quantum computer when it's actually coming online? Sorry, that's a long explanation. That's basically the basis of it.
It's a complicated topic, so it's to be expected, right? And as soon as you start talking about PKI, the audience kind of, if they know it, go, "Oh, we're getting into it today, aren't we?" In this conversation. So you laid out some great kind of understandings of the threats behind what this actually looks like for, again, protected data, let's call it in general. So as we think about that, right, sharing with the audience, take a step back. What are some of the basics, right? What are some of the practical things that they should be considering right now?
Yeah. So first of all, right, building a roadmap. All right. I understand that in the next 3, 5, 7 years, that I'm going to have to be prepared, or I need to prepare my organization to have quantum resistant cryptography in place on specific devices in specific places. And so I need to think about, okay, what do I need to have in place to start to build that roadmap? It's not necessarily a today threat. It's just one that you want to start thinking about. Second, you've got to be able to do that asset inventory, right? Look at all of those devices and all those places where you already have this infrastructure and those algorithms in place, and say, okay, let me start to think about where are the high risk places, the crown jewels, the places I really want to protect. Those are the high risk ones and the ones I need to think about. Where are the middle risk and where are the low risk? And then start thinking about even the low risk ones. Maybe I want to start to think about a roadmap to start to transition them first, because in the cybersecurity community, we all know that when you update and change things, quite honestly, it breaks other stuff. And so you got to be able to do a little bit of testing to figure out, okay, let me start to work this in and let me start to try this out. There are algorithms out there put out by US government agencies that you can start to think about, how do I employ and implement this? I would offer that when you think about where the areas or sectors right now that are facing this a little bit more near term than others, obviously, the US government is focusing on it. They've already put out some publications. They're already thinking about roadmaps and algorithms that they have to change. And there's one that's publicly published. They obviously have trade secrets. And I will say that nation state actors are going to be the ones that likely have that quantum computer first. So that's the threat you're really defending against. And then second, probably defense contractors. So those individuals that right now are creating capabilities or have sensitive information that's pertinent to the US government. A lot of that is whether it's controlled unclassified information or classified information. There's actually a National Security Memorandum 10 that's out there that was issued by the US government that gives timelines and requirements
Hmm.
for entities serving national security systems and US government agencies that have that timeline and requirements. And then there's also financial institutions. I'll tell you, the finance industry is very interested in this and already moving to it, as well as pharmaceutical companies. But that does not mean that other sectors and others shouldn't already be thinking about this. Your future CISOs and cybersecurity professionals will thank you if you start investing in this today so that when it comes to be their problem, they've already got a roadmap to how they can figure it out.
Yeah, 100%. Right there with you. And I think one of the things you said that's really interesting is it does come down to just like knowing what you have, prioritizing those areas so that you're ahead of it. The key applications that the data is sitting behind. You talked about it from a government sector perspective, but then also the commercial sector and the financial services, the pharmaceuticals, and the IP that they all own. Like, it's obvious, but a lot of people don't even have their arms wrapped around really where that sensitive information sits. So that's a perfect starting point. You also alluded to this is a bit longer term, right? And that's definitely the case for quantum computing. And so there's a lot of different competing priorities going on, right?
Mhm.
Cloud is still a competing priority. AI is absolutely a competing priority, right? And so kind of how do you balance, where this sits relative to those other key kind of current initiatives for organizations?
Yeah, so I think that, based on the Digital Trust Insight survey that we talked about early, right? We know that people are thinking about quantum. We know that right now, quite honestly, they're not really investing in it. Very few are. And that's understandable based on all the things that you outlined in terms of things you have to think about every single day. What I would offer is that I think it's really important for companies to say, okay, I acknowledge this is something that I need to be concerned about. It's something that I need to start thinking about. What are some of the interim steps that I can take to start to build out the things that we discussed, whether it be a roadmap, asset discovery? You brought up AI, and then we also, and you can't go through a conversation these days without bringing
Not
up
possible.
artificial
No.
intelligence. But, from an AI capability perspective, right? I'm out there really looking for that key vendor that's going to provide a capability that's going to help me do asset inventory for those type of algorithms to discover those type of devices that need to be brought up to be QRC, quantum resistant cryptography. Let's bring those two together. Let's leverage the technology to kind of help all these companies figure out how do they build that roadmap and that asset discovery as quickly as possible. So I think we can bring some things together. In terms of prioritization, oh God, we're cybersecurity professionals. Everything's a problem every single day.
Right.
It is really hard. It's the priority of today. It's the priority of tomorrow. It's the crisis of yesterday. Unfortunately, it is a constant balancing act. I'm not entirely sure there's the exact formula that helps us figure this out perfectly.
It's true. And it kind of leads me to my next question, which is difficult because, as you said, right, we're in the world of cyber and there's always fires to put out. You got to pick the right fires to focus your attention on, right? And when you look at the C-suite and you talked about kind of the, maybe I'll say future-proofing a CISO. So when you look at that CISO role, what are some of the things that, again, that kind of hold them back right now from prioritizing that? So you talked about asset inventory, which I think is spot on. Like, that's where you really get started, but just kind of walk that through. So I'm a future CISO at XYZ organization come, 2 years from now. Like, what should I really be thinking about now at this point in time?
So in terms of thinking about as a future CISO, I think one of the most important things that a CISO, and I'll put in the context of quantum since we discussed it, is quantum, while you and I understand it and can talk about it, right? A lot of people like to reference it as like the padlock in your browser when you're trying to do secure communications to different places. It's really hard to explain the significance and importance of it to the board and the people who are not cybersecurity professionals. So I think the most important thing that a CISO can think about every single day is how they're communicating something, who they're communicating it to, and how they're translating it to business risk. And like, this is an investment that you want to make, because if you don't think about quantum, and we right now are transmitting our trade secrets using encryption all over the world through all different types of different types of networks.
Mhm.
And that information, quite honestly, is being harvested now by nation state adversaries who want to steal those secrets. And when they have a quantum computer that comes in 3, 5, 7 years, whatever that timeline may be, they're going to be able to decrypt it and be able to steal our intellectual property. And our company may no longer have that competitive advantage, and quite honestly, may no longer exist. So while it's a hard thing to wrap your head around, if you care about the future of this company, if you want to see it live past 5 years, you're going to want to make sure that the information and the things that you care the most about, especially the ones that are reliant on having that encryption in place, we got to invest in making sure that it's resistant against the technology that could potentially take that advantage away from us.
Yeah, no, for sure. And that's exactly what we see going on, to your point. People are getting their hands on information not to use right now, to hold, because they can't, right? They can't get into it. They can't break the encryption schemes on them right now, but they're harvesting it for when they'll be able to. And then there's going to be some serious problems for sure.
And people, pair that with the conversation and the investment and the discussion that's happening around high performance computing and artificial intelligence. So, the basis of that, having large data sets, being able to aggregate it and synthesize it quickly so that you can use that information to your advantage to improve processes to make your business more effective. But imagine if you've got an adversary who's harvesting large amounts of data from multiple companies, from your company, from different types of sectors or technology sectors. And they also layer that and now have the advantage of having been invested and built that high performance computing, being able to build data analytics and being able to now decrypt that information, synthesize it, and be able to use it effectively almost instantaneously against you. All of that coming together is a little terrifying.
A bit.
I will also say there will be an advantage for the defender. I don't want to be all hype and all scare. There will be an advantage for the defender, but it all comes together in that same discussion.
Yeah, it does. It does. And I want to circle it back to what you started with in answering the question from a CISO perspective, years out. You're spot on as it relates to if the CISO today, and we've seen this over the last 5 years, the maturation of the CISO role. Not strictly technically oriented, being able to balance, but being more business focused on, really what am I doing for the organization that I'm with and managing risk specific to that organization. Taking this topic, it's like, you gotta be careful, right? When you're talking to the board about this topic, especially because you're not quite ready. So it's just being able to sprinkle enough information that's business relevant as to what the potential impact could be down the line and why you're spending time with your teams now researching what the potential impact could be for the organization and some steps that we could be taking now, and then asking for the little bit of funding to help support that continued initiative as it relates to everything else you have on your plate.
And it goes back to that conversation we were having about that kind of reactionary cyber defense versus proactive cyber defense,
Exactly.
right? This is a discussion to your board about how I'm thinking down the line, trying to be proactive, trying to be the left of boom, left of incident, left of data breach, so that when this comes online, you're not going to look at me and say, where are we on this? How are we protecting our data? How are we thinking about this threat? What's our asset inventory? Because otherwise, you're going to be scrambling. It's probably going to be a much larger bill. And you're going to have to figure out how to prioritize it. By the way, at the same time, you're dealing with all the things you're already dealing with as a CISO. I mean, God, the CISO profession is so hard right now. And it's always been hard, but it's even worse. And so it is a hard conversation to balance. But I think it's part of that discussion to your board of, hey, I'm trying to be proactive. I am trying to be strategic and tell you what's coming down the line. We don't want to be caught off guard. We want to be out in front.
Yeah, exactly. Morgan, thanks so much for coming on and sharing, about the report, but also about a specific topic right around quantum. And my ask of you is that, fast forward, if it's months, if it's a year or so, come back on. We'll have another conversation, kind of figure out the maturation of this particular area, because it's definitely, again, people need to start thinking about it, applying the thoughts of how they're going to better their world for it and prepare. And I like your aspect of, hey, just get to the basics. Let's understand what assets we have, prioritize them effectively, get our arms wrapped around that, and then start figuring out, okay, where are the spots we need to actually emphasize and prioritize for the organization. So thank you so much for coming on and sharing with the audience what you're seeing. And again, I think we need to come back and revisit this topic for sure in the near future.
Thanks, Rob. Really appreciate being here today.
Excellent. Thank you.